Hey, Sarah. Tommy Gibbons here, professor of the course, and thank you for the work that you've submitted here in week one in both forums. I wanted to send you a reply video. Gives me a chance to say hello and get the conversation started on the right foot, I hope, for the summer, and to give you some initial reaction to what you've written, which is excellent in both of the response forums. I love the engagement with Keck and Bart in the first forum. I think sort of seeing how they resonate with each other, even as they make some interpretive judgments that are different from one another. I suppose I'm more sympathetic with Bart on this score than I am with Keck, although I think that, as you've highlighted, there's a lot to like about Keck's reading. I do think Habakkuk should be read as open, you might say, to a messianic horizon. But in order for that horizon to be meaningful, substantive, I think that the words of Habakkuk also have to have some uh, clear meaning in their immediate context in the prophet's generation, circumstances, what he is complaining to God about, the horror that his people are enduring in their generation. So we want to somehow hold that in a healthy tension with a horizon for the way the messianic age might be shedding light on the hope that Habakkuk is aching for, and what the sort of promise is that the word of the Lord delivers to Habakkuk in these terrible circumstances that he finds himself in. So I like just trying to sort of tease out what faith means in the context of Habakkuk, because I think you're right, maybe, to draw the comparison to what so many people are enduring in the 30s and 40s, um, even earlier when Barth first wrote this commentary, which would be in the teens of the 1900s. But a lot of fear, um, really devastating war, corrupt governments. And it's tempting in those circumstances, as we find in Habakkuk, to grow cynical, to treat our neighbors just heavy handedly, harshly, not really taking the long view, you might say, about how our future depends on how well we treat our neighbors today. And so Habakkuk is urged by the Lord to see that the just don't give up, they don't give in to cynicism. They cling to Israel's God, to the justice of that God, and that's the way that leads through the valley of the shadow to life on the earth, the abundance of God's blessing. With how I've framed that, you can see, and I think Bart is attuned to this, how the faith of the human here depends on the faith of God. The human can be faithful only because God is faithful, trustworthy. That's what inspires the human to persevere in faith in impossible circumstances on the earth. So more we could say there, but I think that's an important emphasis that you've got at the end of your post in Forum 1, because Romans is really about how the faithfulness of God has reached its fullness in the life of the Messiah, in whom the sort of faith of God and the faith of the human are one person who is sharing his resurrection life um, with his people, and finally with all the peoples of the world. I love what you've written here at the in the second response forum. Where was it that I was? I think it's where you were talking about it reading like a sort of counseling. Um, yeah, a marriage counseling script for the church. I love that. And I think that's really true. We have underestimated the extent to which Paul's teaching is directed at particular challenges going on in the community that he's addressing in Rome. And we're going to hear what it has to say to us better, I think, if we can discern what its force is for the audience that we read about in Romans and the sort of analogs that our life exhibits with the struggles of that community. Um, this gives me a chance to say two things that are relevant to this insight of yours here in the second forum. And one is that, and I think you're kind of getting at this, all of the sort of political energy, force that Taubes and others discern in Romans, I don't think that's wrong, but it's important to see that where that plays out is in the sort of uh, marital difficulties, as it were, of the community on the ground in Rome. It's not playing out directly between sort of them and the government of the empire. Not that that's not involved. Um, it is playing out more directly in how they treat each other. That's how they're learning what you might call the politics of the Messiah. It will have effects on um, Rome's hold on power, but we don't want to circumvent the significance of the community's life, their ways of treating each other, sharing a table, sharing time, sharing their material goods with each other. That's the political theater primarily of Paul's gospel. Now, what this is related to, the second point I wanted to highlight is who is in this audience and what kind of struggles are they having? Some of our commentators, I think, jump to the conclusion that it's an audience made up of Jews and Gentiles who are in conflict with each other. I actually don't think that's right, as common as that is to read in commentators, including some of the ones I've assigned for this class. I think if we read closely their chapter 1, um, verse 6, for example, then again, as part of Paul's kind of narrative, verses 13 to 15, of what has kept him from coming to Rome, what he's coming to Rome for. Uh, Paul characterizes the audience as people from among the Gentiles. Then in chapter 11, verse 13, 14, right in there, Paul says, I'm addressing you as apostle to the Gentiles. And he talks about them as people from among the Gentiles. So I don't think that there are any Jewish people that are the most immediate audience of Paul's letter. Are there Jewish people in the community in Rome? Absolutely. Does Paul address conflict between some of his relatives, Jewish relatives, and the audience that's primarily of Gentile background in the letter? Yes. That comes in Romans 9 to 11. But if we read closely, I think that from the beginning to the end of the letter, the teaching is directed not at something Jewish or a Jewish tendency or something like that, which is so often how Christians have read the letter, but it is addressed to what non-Jewish people are doing, struggling with in the life that they're learning together now, serving the God of the Jews, the Jewish Messiah, the law of Moses. So when Paul warns them about, say, how to use and not use the law of Moses, Christians have often jumped to the conclusion that Paul is trying to sort of argue against Judaism and in favor of Christianity. But hopefully you can see by virtue of how I've described the audience, how that might not be a very good reading of what Paul is actually up to. He's not trying to correct Jewish ways of using the law, but non-Jewish ways of using the Jewish law, because everybody that he is addressing now finds themselves adopted into the promised family of Abraham. He'll argue that in chapter 4. So that's just a word we could say about the sort of marital conflict that's going on in Rome that Paul addresses in the letter. Feel free to reply to this if you want to take this a few steps further, but thanks for your good work here in week 1. Some great responses and good to be in conversation with you. Looking forward to more of it throughout the summer. Welcome to the course.